Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be in Genesis chapter 1 today, and I know that there are many controversial questions that you might have. So I'm actually just going to list them and so that we can forget about them until the time comes to bring them up. Right? I don't want to be talking about God's glory and prayer and who the author of Genesis was just to have someone jump in the chat, young earth creationism, old earth creationism, and having that whole debate. So please stay on topic. We will get to those issues in time. So one of the issues that we'll look at is, of course, the age of the earth. We'll look at that question. We'll also look at some other issues, such as, is there any significance in what does it mean when God says that we'll make man in our image, using the plural first person pronoun there. And we'll also look at what the image of God is. There are a number of different views for that. We'll also look at perhaps any significance behind male and female. He created them, what that means for us today, how Jesus understood that passage, how Paul might have understood that passage as well. Any significance in that. We'll also look at the command of to be fruitful and multiply. Is that applicable for us today? Should we be doing that? And we'll also look at an interesting question at the end. Should we be vegetarian or vegan? So those are the issues that we'll look at. Probably the age of the earth is the most controversial. But please hold all your thoughts and opinions for that until we get to that particular section. Yeah, Middle Earth creationism. All right. So, as per usual, since we're starting a new Bible study on a new book of the Bible that we haven't done before, Genesis, we're going to start off with some background information on the book of Genesis. So the first question, of course, is authorship. Who wrote the book of Genesis? This is where you can start yelling out Moses or whoever you think. Or maybe it's an unknown author, or multiple sources and things like that. So I've just mentioned the traditional view, which is Moses, and that has the most biblical support explicitly, where Jesus, says Moses said this, and he attributes Genesis to Moses, among other passages as well. But there is a trend in critical scholarship that posits, okay, we see quite radical differences as we read through Genesis, and we see one section is on this, it may be kind of this style, it's using this vocabulary, and then the very next section uses kind of a different vocabulary and, kind of a different style as well. So they posited basically what's called the documentary hypothesis, which essentially means that you have these various sources that an editor and redactor came in, put all these sources together, and that's why you get these differences in vocabulary and style. And there are four main sources, which are J, E, D, and P. And they stand for, J stands for the Jahwist or the Yahwist, and it starts with J because of how it was spelled in German. But you have the J source, you have the E source, which stands for the Elohist. And the Elohist will use Elohim most often for the name of God, and the Yahwist will use Yahweh for the name of God, and they kind of split the two sources on that line. And then the D source stands for Deuteronomist, the P source stands for the priestly writer. And you have those four main sources, and they kind of divide Genesis up in that. And the documentary hypothesis doesn't stop with Genesis. It actually continues on for the whole Pentateuch, where they kind of try to spot these different sources coming through there. And I bring that up just so that we can kind of ignore it later on, because I don't agree with the documentary hypothesis. But if you are reading Genesis literature, you might come across those letters J, E, D, and P and kind of wonder what they mean, what they stand for, where they come from. Well, now you know, pretty much. So our commentary that I think most people here have, if you want access to the commentary, just send me a direct message. We can get you that. It's a commentary by Alan Ross in the Cornerstone Biblical Commentary series. And he says that there's two immediate difficulties with this theory. And first, there's no complete agreement on which passages belong to which sources. So if you're saying that we can clearly identify these and we can have an observable, repeatable method that is systematic, then you would expect there to be agreement between the scholars who hold to that, and yet there is not complete agreement on that. So the second problem is that additional sources had to be invented to cover passages that didn't fit in any of the four major categories. So someone goes off and says, yeah, this source goes to J, this source goes to E, and this source, I have no idea, we'll just make up a minor source for this one to fall under that category. So there are other major criticisms as well, especially in the realm of archaeology. So for example, it's suggested that the monotheism found in the text was of human origin and gradually evolved over the centuries. So one of the issues was the monotheistic trend of Genesis, and that was hard for various critics to reconcile with the polytheistic, believing in multiple gods, that view of the ancient Near East. And so they came up with this kind of evolutionary hypothesis for the literature as well, that it had to evolve over time, and hence all the writing was very old. And yet archaeology has shown us, and the commentary gives specific examples of this, that we should be dating Genesis to much older than these critics are actually doing. The critics kind of date Genesis at around the exilic and post-exilic period of Babylon, things like that. And so they don't agree with Moses as being the author. Some people don't think that Moses was an actual person either. And of course, as we've gotten to read some more ancient Near Eastern literature, got to some more archaeology, as our commentary says, we see that it was common to use multiple names for a god. So instead of dividing up, okay, J uses Yahweh and then E uses Elohim for God, it wouldn't be out of place for, Genesis to be having one author and to be using multiple names for God. So that is pretty much that. The traditional view, of course, is that Moses would be the author, and depending on where you put the Exodus at, you would be looking at either a 15th century BC date or a 13th century BC date. The 15th century is the more traditional view. So any questions on the authorship of Genesis? You're free to disagree if you want, but we don't really have time to go into those kind of details. All right, we'll get into the next part then, which is ancient Near Eastern literature. And I bring this up as well, along with the documentary hypothesis, because you will see this kind of popularly, where people will be citing other creation accounts during that time, other flood accounts during that time, like Gilgamesh, the Atrahasis epic, and so on. But one thing that I want to note real quickly here is basically that if we're looking at the commentary, which is great, the emphasis on comparative mythology can be helpful. So comparing Genesis to these different mythological pieces of literature during the time. But if it's studied with the presupposition that Israel's faith was quite comparable to that of the pagans and was not a unique revealed faith, then the conclusions will undermine the whole message of the Bible, which is, of course, a major issue. So we have to be careful of that. So it can be helpful at times. I already used it in a helpful way where we could see multiple names for a god being used, and so it wouldn't be out of place for Genesis to have the Yahweh name for God and the Elohim name for God, among others as well, and still have a single author. So it wouldn't be out of place there. I used it in a positive way, but there are many negative ways in which you can use it. So I also want to note that there are a couple extreme positions, such as Genesis was based on these various myths running around in ancient Near East. And the other extreme position is that Genesis, the author, just didn't know about these other myths at all. So those are the two main extreme positions. There's also a little more nuanced view. It's kind of in between that says, well, Genesis wasn't based on these myths, and neither was Genesis ignorant of these myths. Genesis was actually partly written to combat and refute these myths that were running around. So the WBC, another commentary, does a great job with this, and there's basically 5 areas in just Genesis 1 that attacks rival cosmologies. So first, in some Near Eastern cosmologies, dragons are rivals whom the Canaanite gods conquer, whereas in Genesis 1:21, the great sea monsters are just one kind of the aquatic animals created by God. So the second one is that some of these cosmologies describe the struggle of the gods to separate the upper waters from the lower waters, but Genesis 1:6-10 describes the acts of separation by simple divine fiat, or simple command of God, not the various struggle between gods. There's some really weird stuff about that. I was reading one where one god is evil and the other gods kind of contract this god called Marduk to kill this evil god, and so Marduk kills this evil god, and it uses this illustration exactly. Split her body like a shellfish, the evil god's body, and then form the skies and the land with that. So it's quite nonsensical stuff if you're actually reading through it. And yet God in Genesis is portrayed as just by divine fiat, by divine command. And one more, there's a couple others, but we'll get to one more. The worship of the sun, moon, and stars was current throughout the ancient Orient. And we just know that already, yeah. Genesis pointedly avoids using the normal Hebrew words for sun and moon, lest they be taken as divine, and says instead that God created the greater and the lesser light. So that kind of explains the interesting vocabulary there. Instead of just saying the sun and the moon, it says the greater and lesser light, just so that it wouldn't be taken as gods when someone was reading Genesis. So those are the views on ancient Near Eastern literature. Mostly, though, we won't be getting into any of that at all. Unless it's kind of, I mean, some of the parts are funny and I might bring it up later on, such as the shellfish thing. Some of them are funny, some of them are helpful, but we don't need them. And so we just won't address them. We don't have the time either, really. So anyway, that was ancient Near Eastern literature, how it's related to Genesis, and the idea that we won't be using that in our study at all, really. So next, let's look at the occasion of Genesis, or the reason why it was written. So basically, one and pretty much 2 ideas here. Number one, it was partly to encourage the Israelites to leave the land of Egypt. If we do take the traditional authorship of Moses, then we can understand that as being one of the reasons why Moses wrote Genesis, because it all ties into the promised land. And that's a good reason to leave Egypt and to actually be content in leaving Egypt, wandering around in the wilderness if you have to, going through all that trouble just to get to God's promised land. And our commentary says that Genesis provides the historical and theological basis for God's covenant with his people, which is also extremely important. This is why the Israelites follow God. And that was important for Moses to be writing about. We also have a number of themes in Genesis. The main one is that the central theme of Genesis is the provision of a divine covenant with Abraham and his descendants, with its promises to make them the people of God, heirs of the land of Canaan, and a blessing to the world. And there's lots of blessings and cursing motifs throughout the book. Finally, let's look at the genre a little bit. Some people have classified Genesis as a myth, or just as tradition, or perhaps history, and things like that. But it's best to consider Genesis as a unique piece of writing. Probably the closest that we could categorize it in genre would be as Torah literature, because it provides the basis for the Torah, the laws and everything like that, and it's considered as part of the Torah. And the Torah is just here. It's specifically the first 5 books, or the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. History and theology come together to prepare the people of God for the blessing of God. It's not just theology, not just history. It's not myth. Well, some people consider it to be mythological, at least the first 11 chapters. But it's where theology and history come together to have that basis of the Israelite people. Any final questions on the background information? I know we covered a lot. We covered it very quickly. Some of the stuff we covered just to ignore it for the rest of our study. Any questions, though?
Not yet. I'm sure as we go on I will.
All right, that's fine. So in the Bible Study React channel, we're going to start reading. So if you want to be called on to read, you got to have a microphone, of course. So just go to that channel and react to the message there. Dogman's already reacted, so just add your reaction to that, and you'll read a short section, which is pretty good. And Dogman won't be alone in reading. That would also be good. I'll just give you guys maybe another minute to think about the stuff. Maybe react to the message. All right, Dogman, could you please read verses 1 to 4 of Genesis chapter 1?
All right. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, I'm reading from the NIV. No, actually, no. I want to read the ESV. All right. ESV, Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was a light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness.
Wonderful. So we'll stop there for now, because there is some controversy around the very first couple of verses. So I'm just going to give you guys the positions. If you have more questions, we can go through that, and I can point you to some resources. But there are a number of different ways that people have understood, translated, and interpreted the first couple verses, and especially their relationship with each other. So the first option is, okay, perhaps verse 2, and this helps if you got your Bible open and you're looking at the verses, perhaps verse 2 describes something that came to be after God created an originally perfect universe. So this goes along with the gap theory, that in verse 1, okay, God made everything, and made the universe, heavens and the earth. It's actually a merismus there to be... Well, you talk about two extremes in a merismus, and when you talk about two extremes in a merismus, it's a literary device. When you do that, you actually include everything in between. Pretty much you're talking about the whole of everything. So create the heavens and the earth, and then the gap theory says that something terrible happened. Maybe Satan fell, and then there was destruction and wrath, and that's why the earth was formless and void. So that's one option. Another option is that perhaps verse 2 expands and clarifies the particular shape of the earth when God first created it. So verse 1 would be taken as, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Verse 2, and here's what the earth looked like at that particular time. The earth was formless and void. And then we get into, particular creative acts afterwards. So another option is that, okay, does verse 2 describe this situation before God begins his actual creation as introduced in verse 3? This is probably the most dangerous one. I mean, the gap theory is kind of pretty bad too grammatically, but this is probably the most dangerous one because it says, okay, we start off with God, but we also start off with the earth formless and void. And so there was something in that time period before God started creating. So that might be at odds with, creatio ex nihilo, however you pronounce that. And you got to watch out for that because other passages do affirm creation out of nothing. So Romans 4:17, in the presence of him who believed, even God who gives life to the dead and calls into being that which does not exist. Hebrews 11:3 is more explicit. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen is not made out of things that were visible. So you got to be careful with that particular interpretation. A couple others is that perhaps we're looking at verse 1 being a title for this section, and even a creative act on its own. And the traditional view is that verse 1 is the main clause describing the first act of creation, and then verses 2 and 3 described subsequent phases in God's creative activity. So anyway, there's a whole lot there. There's some controversy over that. Just don't let it confuse you too much. I think the best way to understand it is that verse 1 is not only a title for this section, but also describes God's first creative act, so that it kind of meshes a little better theologically with creation out of nothing, and that the earth wasn't kind of floating around with God, and he started and the earth was already there. Any questions on that particular section?
I'd need to pull it up. Someone put it in the chat. BibleBot doesn't like me. Wait.
Yeah, it looks like BibleBot might be down right now, so you have to use the other BibleBot. So if you do /verse and or just put it in brackets like Dogman did, there you go.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Do verse 2. There we go. So, from your best understanding of conservative kind of traditional, orthodox in the general sense, what do you think it's really saying when it says darkness was over the face of the deep and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters? It's implying that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, but that the earth was not just formless and like void. What does that mean? No form and void. Like, what do you think it's really trying to communicate? I'm sorry for the background noise. Do you think it's trying to say the earth was just this round spherical ball of a layer of water, a layer of dirt, and none of it was made yet? And then God made the water have oceans and the land have
yeah, I would say that
continents.
that's probably what it's trying to get at. There's a little ambiguity there, and some people have tried to tie this in with the origins of the earth and the original state of the earth through natural observations and scientific measurements and things like that. But what you just said, I think, is pretty much good. Void just means empty there. It doesn't have all the animals, it doesn't have the plants, it doesn't have the particular seas and division of the land or anything like that. Just formless and void. Darkness part because God hadn't created light yet, but he does that in the very next verse. And let's keep moving on because we got so much to cover. So the next person to read is Tia, and we'll actually start in verse 3. We already read verse 3 to 4. We'll read that again just because we got to get through it, and it makes sense in the context there because that consists of the first day, however you take day. So Tia, could you please read verses 3 to 5?
Yeah, so I'm reading from the NKJV version. Okay. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day.
All right, wonderful. Now here's where we get into the major controversy. Most old Earth creationists don't hold to the gap theory, which we looked at before, where God created everything in verse 1, then some cataclysmic event happened to destroy everything, and then God started recreating things in verse 3. So most people don't hold to that because they're huge issues. Instead, they hold to what's called the day-age theory. So they say that when you're looking at chapter 1, whenever you see the word 1 day, 2 day, second day, and so on, we're actually talking about a long period of time instead of a 24-hour day. So they cite, well, the word day is used in different ways in just the first chapter. God called the light day, he called the darkness night. And that's one way that day is being used in a different way. And the greater light is governing the day. That's another different way that it's being used. And so they also cite other passages where that word is used. And the Hebrew word behind the word day is yom. So they say, well, if you look at other passages of the Bible, yom is actually used to mean an indeterminate period of time. Just a long period of time that we don't know the exact number for, but it doesn't have to mean a literal 24-hour day. And they'll also cite geology, of course, and those scientific findings that do seem to say that the Earth is 4 some billion years old, and that the universe is 13 some billion years old. And so the way that we can kind of integrate the biblical record with the scientific record in those findings is to posit that there's some wiggle room in Genesis 1 to interpret it differently than a 24-hour period. So on the other side, you have the young Earth side, which holds that view that, okay, we're actually talking about 24-hour days here. And this was the view of our commentary. Well, it tries to be, even-handed, but says in favor of the young Earth view, it should be noted that whenever numerals are joined with the word, so day 1, day 2, first day, second day, it refers to a literal day. And give some examples of that. Moreover, the Ten Commandments legislating the keeping of the Sabbath day assumes 6-day creation. So if we go to Exodus and so on, where we see the institution of the Sabbath day, and we see those weekdays, they are based on the 6 days of creation, 7th day of rest, and those are actual, literal 24-hour days. So those are the 2 main options. On the other hand, just to bring it up, you have theistic evolutionism, which doesn't mesh at all with anything that you can take literally in Genesis chapter 1 or even Genesis 1 to 11. So they have to say that, okay, Genesis 1 to 11 is just mythological. It didn't happen historically and literally like that. And that's the other view. And I think that's the most problematic to reconcile with the Bible. It's the one that most aligns with conventional science, though, and evolutionary biology. So I just wanted to bring that up just as one of the other main options. In order to be a theistic evolutionist, you have to hold to an old Earth as well. So I generally kind of lump them together. But usually when you say old Earth creationist, you're kind of excluding the theistic camp, and you're still positing as literal as possible of an interpretation of Genesis chapter 1. The only difference is that they say that yom means age instead of day. So any questions on that? I know it's a lot, so try to be mindful of time. We're not going to fix the issue between the different camps in 1 hour or so. Any questions?
Have you done any research on the different opinions on the age of the Earth and stuff like that? Because for me, the only reason that there would be any question as to doubt the literacy, how literal this is, would be because scientists say, oh, we scanned this rock and it's got lots of carbon in it, so it's millions of years old. Yeah. Or these stars are this many light years away. That means it took that many millions of years for the star to get its light to us. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, God made light. He could have made the stars already shining in the sky. He didn't have to make them travel all the way to Adam, when he first took his first breath and he looked up at the sky. It could have been filled with stars. But my question is, have you looked at all into that on an archaeological scale? My brain's not working fully today, so I'll stop talking now.
It would actually be on a geological scale or a paleontological scale, but I get what you mean. Yeah. So we can do a quick little back and forth between the different views. I'm not the best person at all to represent either of the views. Full disclosure, though, I do lean towards a young Earth. But let's go through the different views real quick. So the young Earth side would say, well, okay, we have the witness of Genesis chapter 1, but outside of the Bible, we have church history, which has always held to a young Earth view whenever you see it. And the old Earth side would say, Well, on our side, we have a very strong argument from the geological record, from the fossil record, and everything that we can see there. And when we do look at church history, we see not only some people saying a literal 24-hour day of creation, we also see some people saying that, okay, maybe these were ages of time and indeterminate periods of time, and perhaps other people, and yeah, not perhaps, but other church fathers do take it as allegorical. That's especially important for the theistic evolutionist side, who have to take things as mythological, allegorical. And the young earth side would respond with, okay, but when you do look at all those church fathers, you see that the allegorical side were only allegorical because a 6-day period of creation was actually too long for them. They were troubled by how long it took God to create everything when God could have just instantaneously created everything. And Kenneth Matthews does this well in his commentary, where he writes, okay, for the ancient people, their issue was that it troubled them that God would take so long to create in 6 literal 24-hour days. But our modern problem is that we think that period of time is too short. So in other words, the allegorical school of interpretation in church history were only allegorical to posit an instantaneous creation, and one that was not in, 6 literal days or anything like that. And for the young earth side, I would say that you were getting at one of the main defenses for the young earth side, which is known as functional maturity. So you can measure the distance from light, from the stars to the earth, but functional maturity would say that, okay, even though it looks to be billions of years for that starlight to get here, what actually happened was that God created that starlight as functionally mature and already shining there. He created the light in between the stars and the earth to immediately get light there. And they cite examples like Adam, for instance, who wasn't created as a baby, who didn't have biological parents or anything like that. He was just created as functionally mature, with functional organs, I would assume with gut bacteria already in him, and everything he needs to, converse with God even. So even those mental and brain structures. So that is the idea of functional maturity. And the old earth side would respond with, okay, but God has given us these rational minds. We can observe certain things in our universe. He has given us tools of observation, tools of measurement. He's given us the scientific method as a proven and accurate way to discover things about the world. And He's given us all these things. So if by rigorous examination of the natural world through geology, through the fossil records, through carbon dating, through everything that we can do, if we come to a wrong conclusion about the universe, then it seems like God is actually the deceiver of us. He's actually deceived us into finding things out and concluding things that aren't actually there but look like they're there. And the young earth creationist side would respond in basically a number of ways, mostly defending that the idea that God is not a deceiver. There's a very interesting article on creation.com, I think, called The Parable of the Candle, where it basically goes through a little story of one friend. He has to go out for a couple hours, so he leaves a candle, and the power's out too. So he leaves a candle on the table, he writes a little note, I'll be back in a couple hours at such and such a time. And then his friends come in the room after he leaves, and they start wondering where their friend went. They start investigating things. And one of them says, well, let's just read the note. That's where he went, he'll be back here. The other person says, I don't really want to trust that. He left a candle though. So let's measure that. If we can measure the rate of which the candle is burning up, and we can measure how much wax is already at the bottom of the candle, we can calculate how long he's been gone for. And then they come to the wrong conclusion that he's been gone for over a day. and he's lost or something. He can't come back. And in a few minutes, their friend comes back. They're wondering, where have you been? You've been gone for a whole day. And he says, I've only been gone for 2 hours, like the note said. And they said, but we did this rigorous examination of the candle. We looked at the rate of burning up and the amount of wax already down. And the friend replies, well, I actually used an already used candle, so it was already half burnt. And I lit that with another candle, so some of the wax actually fell down there, so there was more wax, some extra wax there. And I only left you guys the candle out there so that you would be able to read the note that I left you. And so that parable of the candle ties in with, the Bible for the young earth creationist. God has given us a note, and it is not his fault if we misinterpret the various appearances and signs of creation. He left us a note of the particular time. And then things would, continue going on back and forth. The old earth side would say, well, there's nothing in Genesis saying that we have to, make a timeline of history from these genealogies and get to the origin of the universe. The young earth side would say, well, we actually have a lot of information, extra information here that is not found in other genealogies that would get us to an accurate number of maybe 6,000, 10,000 years, however you want to phrase that. So there's a lot of stuff, and I know we covered a lot, and there's a little bit of back and forth that I couldn't perfectly represent, but it's definitely there. And in addition to functional maturity, there's one thing that I want to bring up for the young earth side, and I'm doing this because I am a young earth creationist, and mostly because I can, and maybe it'll give you guys a different perspective, but it's simply a logical fact. So you can bring on as much science, as much natural findings as you want, but I think I have this simple logical fact in that the natural cannot adequately measure the supernatural or to the supernatural. So of course, creation was pretty much the largest supernatural event in history, and you can't adequately measure that or measure to the supernatural. So natural measurements have to be in the confines of the natural world. So for instance, the first law of thermodynamics and things like that. You can't create energy, you can't destroy energy, you can't create matter, destroy matter really either. And you have that, and yet God created all of this out of nothing. The law of all the laws of thermodynamics did not apply when God was creating the universe. And yet you need those natural laws in order to have your measurements, your natural measurements and things like that. But I will say, of course, that science has worked very well within the natural boundaries, but when you get on a trajectory towards the supernatural, towards the origin of the universe, which was a supernatural event, then I think that things get wonky when you're on that trajectory. But if you're not in that trajectory and you're staying within the natural bounds that the natural can measure, your natural measurements and means, then science does very well in that. So yeah, God made Adam and Eve adults. That's one of the big examples that young earth creationists would use. I think the only argument that the old earth side has against functional maturity, creating something as functionally mature that might have an apparent history, but not an actual history, just it looks like Adam grew up from a baby and learned how to speak and things like that, but he actually didn't go through that kind of history. I think the only argument that the old earth side has against that would be that it would make God a deceiver of them. That's where the whole debate would kind of center on that crux there, I think. All right, any questions on that? I know we covered a lot. Hopefully we can get past this controversial point and move on to other controversial points. Well, that's a good question, but you'd actually translate that as ages, that God created in 6 ages, so he wouldn't be deceiving them. All right, I'm actually surprised. I was thinking at least someone would be up in arms, yelling in the chat or something like that. But let's get into one question, and I probably should have started with this question too. This is a question for everyone. So, I want you guys to participate. You get out of the Bible study what you put into it. I'm going to try to give you guys more opportunity to put in. So my question is the age of the earth an essential doctrine for salvation? Okay, we got a couple no's there. We got one nah in there. Got a nope. The question was, is the age of the earth an essential doctrine for salvation? In other words, do you have to believe that the earth is a young earth in order to be saved, or do you have to believe that the earth is old, billions of years old, in order to be saved? All right, yeah, I think we're pretty much in agreement there. And it's an important issue because sometimes people get vitriolic, they get very aggressive, they get offensive, and they can even go so far as to exclude people from salvation if they don't believe in a certain age of the earth. And Matt has already pointed out one of what I think would be a big issue of the theistic evolutionist side. If death and evolution exist before God made the world, then it didn't enter because of sin. Another issue is that you have to have billions of years, millions of years of evolution, and yet God is sitting there looking at all of this death, destruction, disease, and all that's necessary for evolution and saying, yeah, that's good. It's kind of hard to reconcile with the biblical account. Yeah, and Fang brings up another good point there. Yeah, so Chuck, I think that gets back to the original question, the way I phrased it. You don't have to have a particular view of the age of the earth at all in order to be saved. And I'd be in agreement with most of you. I think pretty much everyone. Maybe someone's withholding, that's fine. I'd be in agreement with most of you, all of you, in saying that this is not an essential issue of salvation. And I think that we should engage in our discussions with that in mind, that we're still talking to brothers and sisters. And this also brings up one thing that I wanted to mention, is that when I witness to people, if someone has this as a stumbling block for them, if they go, well, I can't believe in a young earth or anything like that, and I believe in evolution, things like that, I'll just bring up old earth and theistic evolutionary, Christians and resources, and then say, okay, that doesn't matter for your salvation. What matters for your salvation is the gospel. Now let's get into that. You don't have to be a Christian. You don't have to be a young earth Christian. You don't have to believe in that to be a Christian. And that's what I would say to them. Now let's get to what really matters for your salvation. Yeah, straight to the gospel, straight to Jesus Christ, KOTOR. Good stuff. All right, we will move on now. That was the first day, and along with controversy around that. So God created light, separated the light from the darkness. Let's keep on reading now, and we'll get to the next reader. Let me see who that's going to be. That is Avi. So Avi, could you please read... Actually, let's just start at verse 3 again. Let's read verses 3 to 19.
Ooh, that's a chunk. All right. I'm reading from the ESV. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and for years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day.
All right, thanks. So that was the next section, which is just 3 to 19, where we get the first 4 days of creation going there. And there's some interesting stuff about the expanse in verses 6 to 8. So most likely, I would consider this, as our commentary does, that we're talking about a separation of the atmospheric waters and the terrestrial waters, where you have the sky and all of that kind of stuff in between those things. And Hugh Ross, an old Earth creationist, actually gets into some very interesting stuff about how there would be a dense water covering around the Earth at this point in time, and an extremely dense atmosphere as well. And so, yeah, as our commentary says, this may suggest previously there had been a dense moisture covering the Earth. There's some interesting implications about that. I think one of the most interesting is that the biblical writer, which I think is Moses, actually knew that the atmospheric layer was watery. It had moisture to it. That's not something that the ancient world would be able to easily figure out or anything like that. I mean, you can look at rain a little bit, but to say that that entire area was, watery is pretty impressive. And I think some evidence of, supernatural inspiration there. And there's a couple other things in this section too. One question that I had for you guys, verses 14 to 19, looking at the fourth day, this is when God made the sun, moon, and stars, but that's on the fourth day. How was there a morning and evening on the first 3 days? How would you guys answer that? So Kurt says supernatural light. Yeah, it's an option.
Perhaps it was not counting the sun going up and down necessarily, since obviously there was no sun, but the period of time that was 24 hours. However, if you want to be real particular, God could just turn out the lights at the end of the day. Make the light dim.
Yeah, he could have manually controlled it. Or as Kurt said, perhaps there was a light source in verse 6 on the first day, and the earth was just rotating around that. I mean, that's how we get our mornings and evenings anyway. And Avi suggests, okay, well, God is light. Perhaps he physically manifested that light in day 1. Maybe, I don't know how that would work exactly. That's one of the issues with that interpretation, but it is an option. I don't know how it would work with the darkness, though, if we're talking about God's light. But yeah, interesting stuff. And these are all options that church fathers have brought up throughout the centuries. I think Augustine also brought up the option that perhaps the day 1 light was the angels. And there are a couple other options. I think I would go with Kurt's option, though, as the simplest option. God made a light source on day 1. The earth rotated and had morning and evening, darkness and light because of that. I think that's the simplest one. Other people would see chronological issues here, though, and say that we have to take this as a mythological account. But I think Kurt's option would be the best there. All right, so that was the first 4 days. Let's continue on to the next section. I think we'd be back to Dogman now. So Dogman, could you please read verses 20 to 26?
Sure. I'm reading from the ESV. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth, across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, the 5th day. And God said, Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, Let us make man in our own image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.
Wonderful. So that was the last couple days, along with the start of the 6th day there. There's some interesting stuff here. Namely, we look at verse 26. Let's look at that, because that's where some controversy is. Then God said, Let us make man in our image. What do you guys think that means? That God is using the first person plural pronoun. All right, yeah. Trinity. Father, Spirit, Son. Yeah, that's a good point that Matt brings up. We do see the Holy Spirit, or at least the Spirit of God, whoever, whatever that is, hovering over the waters. So yeah, you guys have brought up one of the main views. This has, support in church history with the early church fathers talking of, this being the Trinity seen in Genesis chapter 1. There is a slightly more nuanced view here, though, that a number of scholars take today, in that, okay, we're not talking about a full doctrine of the Trinity in Genesis chapter 1, but it is clear that we see some kind of plurality of person in Genesis chapter 1, and of course the New Testament gets into more detail on this plurality of person in the form of the doctrine of the Trinity. So that is the nuanced view, and the other view, of course, is that we're not talking about the Trinity. Perhaps the most aggressive way that this is put is that we're talking about a plural of majesty in the pronouns that God is using in verse 26. So it's not a plural of person, it's a plural of majesty. He's just so majestic he is using a plural pronoun. And there are some major issues with that interpretation, especially as we, continue on. And the major issue with that is that plurals of majesty are rarely, if ever, used with verbs, according to Robert Letham in his book on the Trinity. So you don't see plurals of majesty used with verbs, and yet we have the verb right here with God acting in verse 26. Let us make man in our image. And the WBC commentary actually puts this stronger than Robert Letham. Instead of saying, well, plurals of majesty are rarely, if ever, used with verbs, he just says that they're never used with verbs at all. So I would say that just completely destroys the idea that we're talking about a plural of majesty and not a plurality of person in here. So the other option, of course, is, and we looked at a couple options. One, the Trinity. Two, a more nuanced view where we're talking about just plurality of person, maybe not the entire doctrine of the Trinity just yet in Genesis. Number three, plurality of majesty. We've rejected that. And the fourth option that I kind of see, especially in a little bit in church history, is that perhaps God is addressing the angelic beings as well. There's a number of issues with that, and major issue is that man wasn't made in the image of God and angels. He was just made in the image of God. So that would be the main issue I see with that interpretation. All right, let's get into what the image of God actually is now. And there are three major views for this. So we looked at the plural pronoun, let us make man in our image. Now, what does image mean? What does it mean to be made in the image of God and according to his likeness? Well, there are three main views. You have the substantive view. We're going to go through this fast. Substantive view, relational view and functional view. Let me just copy these down because you may not be too familiar with those. So the substantive view is that, well, there are certain inherent qualities to man that means that he's made in the image of God, such as maybe his reason, his rationality, or his metacognition, that he can think about how he's thinking, and perhaps other qualities as well, maybe emotional qualities, and so on. And then you have the relational view, number 2, in that what it means to be made in the image of God is to be able to come into a relationship with God. Number 3, you have the functional view, where the image of God is a function. It's something that a human being does or has the capacity to do. And that has some good, support in the text there, because right after God created man and woman in his image, verse 28, God blessed them and God said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish and over the birds." So there's a function to that given right after he says that they're made in his image. So very quickly here, I think that option number 1 is actually the best option, the substantive view, that there is or are inherent qualities in man because of the image of God. And I would say that those inherent qualities allow someone to be in a relationship with God, and that those inherent qualities allow someone to fulfill that function in verse 28. So it's kind of the basis for the other options there. So any questions on verse 26, on either the plural pronouns or the image of God? I know we're going fast, but we're almost through it.
Do you think that there's any correlation that it is implying through saying, "Let us make man in our own image," and then saying that they would rule over the fish and the birds and the this and the that? Do you think that there's some sort of emphasis there? Or do you think it's just more so like, let's make man in our own image, period, and they will do this job?
Yeah, I would say that there's some correlation there. I don't think that excludes the other options, though. So the substantive view, man has rationality, he has emotions, he has hopes and dreams and imagination and everything like that, helps him, in that function of ruling over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and so on. And in addition to that, there's another interesting point in the ancient Near East where kings, especially in distant lands, would have statues built of them. I think you already hinted at that, Matt, when you said idols. But statues, statues being built of them in these distant lands so that those people in those distant lands would know who their, kingly ruler is. And so perhaps another function of the image of God is to have us as God's representatives on earth, kind of bearing his image, showing everyone who the creator of heaven and earth is, similar to the function and things that kings in the ancient Near East would do. So just some interesting stuff, some background information there. But we do have to move on now. Let's get into the next section now. And I don't think anyone else, no one else has reacted. So Tia, could you please read verse 27? Actually, 27 to 28.
Okay. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on earth."
Wonderful. So that was verses 27 to 28. We're going to go through this fast, but the thing I want to focus on here is that God created them male and female. And I think there is great significance in that. So number 1, you have in Matthew chapter 19, verse 4, have you not read, this is Jesus speaking, that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female. And he's responding to the idea of, should we allow for divorce? And then Jesus specifically, I'll say, Jesus specifically responds with the divinely created order. So it is authoritative, and there is significance to male and female. And I would say that this is the basis for excluding homosexuality and polygamy and things like that. So that's what I would bring up that. And one thing that I want to bring up too is in Romans chapter 1, 26 to 27. If you look at that, you can also paste it in the chat. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way also the men abandoned their natural function of the woman and burned in their desire toward one another, men with men committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. And I think here, Paul is not referring to the general animal kingdom and things like that. This is a common LGBT argument that I've seen, though, where they say, well, either Paul was wrong or he's referring to something other than homosexual practice when he's writing this section. Because if you look at the animal kingdom, you see homosexuality there. And so it's apparently natural. And I would respond with, that's not the argument you want to make. Because when you look at the animal kingdom, yeah, you see homosexuality, but you also see murder, you see incest, and you see non-consensual acts, and all sorts of things there. So I don't think that's what Paul is referring to at all, and it's not the argument you want to make either. Instead, if we look at the context, we are talking about creation. Paul's been mentioning creation throughout this. From the beginning of creation, people have been suppressing the truth and things like that. So here, I believe he's referring to the divinely created order, and that is what he means by natural, male and female, the way it was always intended to be. And Jesus, of course, cites male and female in Matthew chapter 19. It's not Adam and Steve, but it's Adam and Eve. So he cites that as well. And some people have said that, well, Jesus never talked about homosexuality. I would disagree, because he excludes it when he says male and female. That also excludes polygamy as well, because you're talking about two individuals. And it excludes those things. And I would also say that's actually an argument against the LGBT position and interpretation of Jesus' thoughts and actions, because if we're looking at an area overrun by, you can even say animosity towards LGBT, or specifically homosexual practice, especially in the Jews of that day, that's just undeniable. And if you say that Jesus didn't address it, then you're saying that Jesus didn't speak out against that kind of stuff, and that he was perpetuating the oppression of minorities in the area and things like that, because he never spoke out against it. But anyway, I know that was a lot. I know it was controversial. Some of you might disagree, but we can continue that discussion later, perhaps. If you have some quick questions, though, you can ask them now, else we will move on very quickly. Yeah, that's true, Kurt. It's not the argument they want to make. All right, let's continue on then. We'll get into the next part, which is in the same section that we read, where in verse 28, God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." So my question for you guys is this a command for us? Should we be fruitful and multiply? Okay, let me phrase this a little more aggressively then. Do you have to get married then? Okay, most people are saying no to that one. So yeah, we see especially when we look at the biblical record, we see Jesus, who no indication of marriage, and he also talks very fondly of eunuchs, and that if someone is able, they should become a eunuch for the sake of the kingdom. So that assumedly involves not being fruitful and multiplying if you're becoming a eunuch, either figuratively or literally. And Paul as well looks at singleness very fondly and favorably throughout his writings. Avi kind of puts a play on the word there. doesn't mean just having children, does it? I would say that in the context of Genesis 1, we are talking about children because you have to, have children to multiply and fill the earth. But you are right that in other contexts, it doesn't have to mean just children, and often doesn't when we're talking about other passages. So yeah, I think we answered that pretty well. And some people would say, going back to the LGBT issue, okay, we're only talking about male and female in order for them to fulfill this function of being fruitful and multiply. But we don't have to be fruitful and multiply anymore, so we can have homosexual relationships now. And Robert Gagnon, in his book, wrote, okay, should humans then mate with animals to avoid procreation? Or has God changed the complementarity of male and female anatomy? God's intent for human sexuality is embedded in the material creation of gendered beings, irrespective of the globe's population. Male and female, he created them, probably intimates that the fullness of God's image comes together in the union of male and female in marriage. And that's something that you could not infer from same-sex unions. So that's just one thing that I wanted to bring up there. And that's probably the last piece of controversy that we'll get into today. There's just one little thing left. And next person to read is Avi. So Avi, as we move on to the last section that we're reading, I know this is kind of longer than usual. Hopefully you guys are still sticking around though. I know some of you have had to leave, but we're almost there. So Avi, could you please read verses 29 to 31?
This is again the ESV. And God said, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day.
Perfect. So that was the last day of creation. Seventh day, we'll get into next week, chapter 2, where God is resting. But my controversial question for you guys today, and this is a doozy. Genesis chapter 1, verse 29. I have given you every plant yielding seed, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you, as well as the animals. Does this mean that we should be vegetarian? It doesn't say anything about animal products either, so maybe we should be vegan. What do you guys think?
After the flood, which is later in Genesis, spoilers, they were given permission to eat meat, but they could not eat the blood because the blood was the life, or at least that's what I remember it saying. So because we don't live in a pre-fall world, it seems like that's why we're allowed to eat it. But in heaven, I don't think there'll be meat. And also, if we had perfect non-decaying bodies, we wouldn't need to, because we wouldn't need it. So
yeah, you brought up the passage that I was exactly thinking about, Genesis chapter 9, 2 to 3. Every creature that lives and moves will be food for you. As I gave the green plants, I have given you everything. So this first command, which I would say involves vegetarianism, was just to Adam and Eve. And then we have this next command in a post-fall world, like you mentioned. And that includes animals as well. And of course, if we look through the Old Testament law, we see that animals were being eaten and recommended to be eaten. Priests were eating animals and sacrifices and things like that. And then in the New Testament, we see those dietary restrictions done away with, so that some of the animals that the Israelites could not eat, we can now eat under the new covenant. So it's interesting stuff, and probably not as controversial as I jokingly made it out to be. But anyway, those are the 6 days, and I was going to ask you guys to type out an outline of the 6 days, because I think that would be very helpful, but we unfortunately don't have enough time for that. But on your own, I would recommend just typing out an outline of the 6 days and kind of what happened during those days, and it will kind of help you tie everything together there. But just because I know some of you may not do that, I'll give you the outline right here just to kind of summarize everything that we went through. So on day 1, we have light. On day 2, mainly we have the heavens. And number 3, we have earth, edible vegetation. Day 4, we have the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, we have the fish and the birds. Day 6, you have the land animals and man. And there's an interesting parallelism going on in these 2 columns. So number 1, you have light in general. And then if you look across that row, number 4, the sun, moon, and stars, that gets more specific. So what kind of light now? So the sun, moon, and stars. So if you look at number 2, the heavens, well, number 5, day 5, gets more specific in the birds inhabiting the heavens. And number 3, earth, vegetation, and that also kind of prepares the way as well, especially the vegetation, because in day 6, land animals and man need vegetation to consume and things like that. And day 7 stands on its own. It's the climax of that whole thing, the Sabbath. All right, but I still would recommend you guys outlining it yourself. Maybe you want to change the outline here, maybe be more specific on the outline and things like that. So we covered a lot, and real quickly, we'll go through a summary, and then I'll ask you guys to write out a short application of, how this chapter applies to your life, because I think that's important. Instead of looking at all these controversial issues and things like that, we should be doers of the word in some fashion. So think about that as we go through a summary of what we covered. First, we looked at authorship. So the traditional view is that Moses wrote Genesis, but there's also a critical view that says, well, there are different sources and different editors. We have J, E, D, and P as the various sources. We looked at some problems with that idea, and we accepted Mosaic authorship. And there's also ancient Near Eastern literature kind of running around. How do we, understand that along with Genesis? Can it help us in any way? It's kind of helpful, but we won't be using it much. The reason why Genesis was written was partly to encourage the Israelites to leave the land of Egypt and encourage them to continue on to the promised land and not look back. And it also provides the historical and theological basis for God's covenant with his people, especially when we get to Abraham and how that's supposed to be blessing the entire world in time. The genre of Genesis is Torah literature. It's very unique. It has historical and theological elements to it. So just think of it as a unique piece of work. And we don't have enough time to get into an outline of Genesis today. We'll get into the outline next week when we start in on that. Then we talked about the various 6 days of creation, along with issues such as the age of the earth, which is not an essential doctrine that you have to hold to a particular view on in order to be saved. We also talked about creation out of nothing. We looked at, some other things such as how was there light on the first day if the sun, moon, and stars were created on the 4th day? And how was there day and night? And we looked at some of the solutions for that. We looked at the significance and meaning of God using first-person plural pronouns such as us and our. Let us make man in our image. And we concluded that the best understanding of that is either a Trinitarian view or simply kind of more ambiguous, that there is a plurality of persons in the divine being. And we looked at what the image of God actually was. So some kind of inherent quality or qualities that God created man in that would allow him to have a relationship with God and allow him to subdue the earth. And then we also looked at male and female, the significance of that, why Jesus cited it, and the authority that he put on the divinely created order, as well as what Paul said about that. And we looked at the command made to Adam and Eve about being fruitful and multiplying, and our diets. Should we be vegetarian? We covered a ton. So for now, I want you guys to write out a short application of how you would apply Genesis chapter 1 to your lives, just type it out in the chat. And I know that's a tough one to apply, and we already looked at that we don't have to, be married. We don't have to do that, so we can't apply that to our lives. You don't necessarily have to be married, so we can't apply that part. But, think of an application. And here's some ideas, though. What does Genesis 1 tell you about God? I think that's a good start. And in specific applications, you can go about your life thinking about God in that fashion, in the way that Genesis 1 kind of describes God. So write out an application in the chat. I want to see everyone there. Unless you're driving, don't take your hands off the wheel. Yeah, that's a great one, Matt. God made us for his glory and pleasure. We are in submission to him and his purpose by design for our existence. Yeah, it's another good one, Avi. Banking on that, made in the image of God. Yeah, that's another excellent one, Dogman. That's another area where some scholars believe that Genesis is refuting the other cosmologies of the day. God speaking things into existence. He's not using pre-existent matter. He's not using other gods' bodies to make the heavens and the earth. He's not using magical incantations and formulas like Egyptian ancient literature would say. But yeah, it's good stuff. Our God is not that small. That's a good one, Leegi. We are made out of love. Chapter 2 will get into a little more detail, too, in the creation of male and female. How God personally has a hand in that creation. Yeah, full of purpose. Real good stuff. Yeah. Yeah, you guys are doing great. Real good applications. And I think that's important, especially in a chapter like this, where we spend a lot of time in controversy. Yeah, I would say that being made in the image of God is definitely a blessing. All right, let's close this out then. Thank you all for sticking around. I mean, this one was longer than usual. But, Dogman, could you please close us out with a word of prayer?
Sure. My God, thank you for this Bible study today. Thank you for this chance to get together and study your word. Thank you for Mark, who prepares these lessons for us to learn. There's so much power and depth in your words, and there's so much to learn from. Help us as we go about our weeks, and help us grow in faith and love towards you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.